I want to thank everybody for coming today. My God, it's such a beautiful afternoon. I'm very honored that you came here instead of working in the garden. But the idea of this type of a book, which is called Traditions in Boston, started a couple of years ago, and it's by Fonthill Media. Alan Sutton, who started Arcadia, began a new company after 10 years of selling Arcadia, and it was something that actually was in color. He asked me to actually present some different ideas of what I could possibly do. And of course, I'm doing a book on every neighborhood of the city of Boston, but I also began to suggest things like Traditions in Boston that included Bostonians' interpretation of Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, St. Valentine's Day. And this book on Halloween traditions was written in February and March of this year. It wasn't very Halloweenish, but I still actually enjoyed doing it, doing tremendous amounts of research, but also to begin to capsulize our shared memories. So as you can see on the cover, this fantastic photograph, which was black and white, which they colorized, showed two children oohing and ahhing that they hold their jack-o'-lanterns. And in some ways, this would lead to what we eventually knew as jack-o'-lantern, which, as we'll see in this lecture, descends from Stingy Jack, who was a man that was actually to roam the world after having been banned from both hell as well as heaven. Well, Noah Webster describes Halloween as, quote, October 31st. It's observed especially with dressing up in disguise, trick-or-treating, and displaying jack-o'-lanterns during the evening, unquote. However, Halloween is more than simply a date or dressing up in disguise. It has deep roots in Celtic culture of Scotland, Ireland, Wales, Cornwall, Brittany, and the Isle of Man. Halloween is short for All Hallows Eve and has its origins dating back to the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain, the Celtic New Year's festival. The Morrigan was the Celtic deity associated with war and fate, who led her people, often appearing as a crow. All Hallows really means summer's end, and the festival celebrated the end of the harvest season and the coming of winter. The Celts believed that the veil between the worlds of the living and the dead were thinnest at this time, and the dead could return and walk where they had once before. Further, those who had died in the past year and who, for one reason or another, had not yet moved on, would do so at this time and could interact with the living. Well, in that instance, it wasn't just the fact that it descended from the Celts, but Halloween took on a whole new meaning in 20th century Boston. It was introduced by the immigrants and seen here on Lewisburg Square, one of the more elegant areas to live on Beacon Hill. It's an area that had not only the doorways lit so the children knew which doors to actually trick-or-treat at, but it also had jack-o'-lanterns lit from within all over the square itself. But in a lot of ways in this book, I try to incorporate both 17th century witchcraft as well as even the whimsy of the 21st century. And seen here, dressed in their festive Halloween costumes, these bronze ducklings in the public garden of Boston were sculpted by Nancy Schoen as a recreation of the Mallet family in Robert McCluskey's children's classic book, Make Way for Ducklings. And seen here, the ducklings, Jack, Tack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Hack, and Quack, are led by Mrs. Mallard, who is the classic story, and they lived on the island in the lagoon in the public garden. Mrs. Mallard taught them to walk in a line, to come when they were called, and to keep a safe distance from bikes and scooters and other things with wheels. Seen here, they're on their way to visit Policeman Michael, who feeds them peanuts daily. It's not just Halloween when people dress them, and this is done anonymously. Nobody actually knows who does this. They must do it at the veil of 3 to 4 o'clock in the morning. Too late for people coming home from the bars and too early for the rest of us going to work. But they're dressed at Halloween, Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, and it's a wonderful aspect that not only children love, but even those of us adults. But seen here, by the mid-20th century, Halloween was something with children dressing in costume and disguise. And in this instance, with not only a jack-o'-lantern with a candle within, but a shock of corn and Indian corn in the foreground, it was the quintessential idea of what Halloween represented. But in some ways, seen here in a photograph of the early 1930s, these two young boys have just hollowed out a pumpkin and created this face that is illuminated by the candle within, but it also illuminates their face. And you can imagine the excitement of actually dressing and going out trick-or-treating. But during the period of the 17th century, we realized in some ways that the traditions that were handed down by the Celtic culture was something that included Stingy Jack. Now, it says that the jack-o'-lantern is associated with the Irish folktale of Stingy Jack, a clever con man who fooled the devil into banning him from hell. But because of his sinful life, he could not enter heaven. And after he roamed the world carrying a small lantern made from a turnip with a red-hot ember from hell to light his way. Many people believe this legend evolved from the sightings of the will-o'-wisp, swamp and marsh gases which glowed in the night. But on All Hallows Eve, the Irish hollowed out turnips and carved them with faces, placing a candle inside, so that as they went about souling on the night, when the veil between life and death was thinnest, they would be protected from the spirits like Stingy Jack. Well, in some ways, that was something that actually was the interpretation of the Puritans who had settled Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630. Many of these people believed every word of the Bible, and they created a Bible commonwealth. So if one believed in God, you also believed in the devil. And in 1692, it was said that the devil descended upon Salem. And seen here in a painting, which was called The Examination of a Witch, and this was by Tompkins Madison, painted in 1853, it depicts Mary Fisher, a young girl accused of being a witch during the Salem witchcraft trials, who was seized by Deputy Governor Richard Bellingham in the absence of Governor John Endicott, and shamefully stripped to the waist for the purpose of ascertaining whether or not she was indeed a witch, and whether or not there was a devil's mark upon her. Well, during this period, anyone could be accused of being a witch, and the devil's mark could simply be a freckle, a mole, or a cut, or even a bruise. It all depended on what the interpretation was. But in this instance, dozens and dozens of people would actually be accused of being witches. Well, witchcraft was known in England in the period of the 14th, 15th, and 16th century. And seen here in 1643 is a small broadside that says it's a most certain, strange, and true discovery of a witch. And this was printed by John Hammond in 1643 in London. The pamphlet was written during the English Civil War and describes a woman known as the Witch of Newbury, England. She was a tall, lean, slender woman, and as the soldier supposed, to his amazement and great terror, treaded upon the water with her feet, and with as much ease and firmness as if she should walk or trample on the earth. I don't know if she really walked on water, but in this instance, she was overtaken by parliamentary forces, and the purported witch was fired upon by the soldiers, and with a deriding and loud laughter, she caught their bullets in her hands and chewed them. Good teeth. Depicted as an old barefoot woman, she was further beset by two black ravens, the harbingers of doom and oft companions of witches. And the pamphlet ends that they immediately discharged a pistol underneath her ear, at which she straight sunk down and died, leaving her legacy of a detested carcass to the worms. Her soul we ought not to judge of, though the evils of her wicked life and death can escape no censure. Sensational, but it was something in some ways that older women and crones, very difficult women in the community, would be accused of being witches. And it wasn't any different in Boston or Salem. And seen here is the Reverend Increase Mather. He was the son of the Reverend Richard Mather, a staunch Puritan minister from Dorchester, Massachusetts. He was educated at Harvard College, and Mather, like his father, opposed anything openly contradictory to or mutually exclusive with or potentially distracting from his puritanical and narrow religious beliefs taught by his father in the Puritan hierarchy. And when Sir Edmund Andros came to Massachusetts as the governor of the Dominion of New England and restored the Papist holiday and allowed a maypole to be set up at Charlestown, Mather was shocked and appalled. In fact, he said that the devil had begun his march in triumph in Boston. Mather served as the minister of the Second Church of Boston, but he also became president of Harvard College. So ministers, as well as people, were well aware of this aspect of sin. And we saw in that aspect that this booklet, further account of the trials of the New England witches, was actually written by Increase Mather at the request of the ministers of New England. And it was published in London in 1693, the year after the great trials. As Mather was president of Harvard College and a respected clergyman, the book outlined the observations of a person who was upon the place several days when the suspected witches were first taken into examination. In his book, he called into question the use of spectral and other evidences allowed to be used by the judges in the witch trials. Spectral evidence could simply be that witch's mark, which was a simple blemish or pimple or mole. And in the cases of conscience, it stated arose, as we have stated, about the evidence used in the trials. And it came about that the subject of the witch trials was discussed by the ministers on the 1st of August, 1692. Well, in this way, in some aspects, the leading and presiding judge was Lieutenant Governor William Stoughton, who would later be appointed the royal governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony by the king. He was the Chief Justice of the Court of Boyer and Terminator in 1692, and it was this court that tried the various people for witchcraft. He ruled over the trials with determination to eradicate all witches from Massachusetts Bay Colony, and he was heavily influenced by his conservative and narrow-minded Puritan convictions. It was he who allowed spectral evidence of the afflicted girls to accuse their fellow townspeople of witchcraft. And when the court was dissolved, Stoughton continued to enjoy political success and never apologized for his role in the trials, though his fellow 8 judges did recant and apologize. When Stoughton died in 1701, he was enormously wealthy. The town of Stoughton, Massachusetts is named in his memory. He gave his money to Harvard College, and you can see Stoughton Hall in the background. Well, in that instance, in this painting, which you actually see a man on the right-hand side on his knees, begging for mercy, and this was John Burroughs, it was a man that was actually accused of being a witch by his own granddaughter. And you began to see in this instance that the mass hysteria, turmoil, theatrical trials, and denunciations that led to the execution of 21 innocent people make the Salem witchcraft trials one of the black marks against the province of Massachusetts Bay Colony. And the painting, The Trial of George Jacobs for Witchcraft, clearly shows the raw emotion of those in the room. But in the center is Jacobs' own granddaughter, who is pointing at him, accusing him of witchcraft. One of the judges rises from his chair as people react to the accusation. And Jacobs was a prosperous farmer and well respected in Salem. And though he denied the allegations, saying that, quote, I am as innocent as a child born tonight, he was nonetheless found guilty and hanged as a witch in 1692. It was something that really did come to a fruition. And seen here in the trial of Giles Gorey, this was one of the last. This was a man who was accused of witchcraft by these young girls, Ann Putnam, Marcy Lewis, Abigail Williams, Mary Walcott, and Elizabeth Hubbard, and he's seen being led into court. He pleaded not guilty, but refused to be tried by the court, which, in his view, had already determined his guilt. So he stood mute rather than putting himself to the contrary. He was sentenced to peine fort endure, even though it was an illegal punishment, and ended up being torturally crushed to death by heavy boulders placed on a board over his body in September of 1692. And one of the major factors that made Giles Corey a prime target was not only his relationship with the rest of the community, but also his past encounters with the law, including a prior conviction for murder. His chosen means of resistance and dramatic death reveal a strength of character. And though 21 people were executed for being witches, 20 hung, And of course, Giles Corey was pressed to death with boulders. It was incredible. But the whole aspect of these traditions that came down and were accepted by the people of Massachusetts Bay Colony would include many of the ancient traditions introduced by the Celts. Seen here is Snapapple Night. This is a painting that was done by Daniel McLeese, and it was a celebration of All Hallows Eve, a time when supernatural influences prevail, the time when spirits, both visible and invisible worlds, walk abroad and can be invoked by human powers for the purpose of revealing the mysterious future, and spirits may be called from the deep at will. The word Halloween actually means saints, and of course, evening, and it comes from a Scottish term for All Hallows Eve, the evening before All Hallows Day. Well, in that instance, it wasn't just bobbing for apples, but it also included this etching of Halloween. And that shows people around a brazier. You can see it on the right-hand side burning. And as an engaged girl places a nut on the fire, it was said if the nut burned quietly, the marriage would be happy. However, if the nut spat and hissed, the marriage would be stormy. However, if the girl put two nuts on the fire, one for her lover and one for herself, and the nut spat and hissed, then this was obviously a bad omen for their future happiness. So leave it up to the nuts. And you also saw the Three Luggies. This woman is blindfolded and led to a table, and we see that there are three bowls in front of her. She's told to put her left hand into one of the bowls, and if she dips her fingers in the clear water, she'll marry a bachelor. If it's in the milky water, a widower. And if it's an empty bowl, it's a sure sign that she will live in single blessedness all her days. This ceremony must be gone through with 3 times, and the hand be dipped twice in the same bowl in order to make the prediction of any value. But these were things that people enjoyed, including these children, and the sign above the tableau says, "Shake hands with a ghost." But it shows children in the foreground bobbing for apples, floating in a huge zinc tub, and they hold their hands aloft as a friend dressed as a ghost hovers above them, and 2 levitate on either side. Bobbing for apples started in Europe hundreds of years ago as a common way for young lovers to court one another. Don't ask me. If the bobber, typically a young girl, successfully bit into the apple with the name of a love interest in one go, it was favored the lucky couple, and the fate gave them the go-ahead. However, it is also said the first person to bite an apple would be the next one in the group to actually have a marriage. Well, these were fun, but by the mid-20th century, things had come down. But now Stingy Jack was known as Jack-o'-lantern, and no longer was it a hollowed-out turnip with a coal from hell. Now it was a jack-o'-lantern, which was a pumpkin, which actually had a candle within. This young boy and his faithful companion stare in to the pumpkin, and it says in a poem by John Griefly Whittier, "When wild, ugly faces we carved in its skin, glaring out through the dark with a candle within. When we laughed round the corn heap with our hearts all in tune, our chair a broad pumpkin, our lantern the moon, telling tales of the fairy who traveled like steam in a pumpkin shell coach with 2 rats for her team." This was the beginning of what eventually would become Halloween in Boston. And the Halloween in Boston, the basics were now in place, thanks to the immigrants of the 19th century from Ireland and the British Isles, with children going from house to house asking for sweet treats in the form of soul cakes and carrying jack-o'-lanterns. Shortly after their arrival in the United States, the Irish had substituted the turnip for the pumpkin as their lantern of choice on Halloween, as it was much easier to carve. And the term trick or treating has evolved as it meant young people and children went on a destructive bend if they were not given treats such as soul cakes and later candy. In fact, at the turn of the 20th century, it was said that children destroyed fences, egged houses, and of course destroyed gardens if they weren't given treats. So it was a trick or a treat. And that way, by the early part of the 20th century, the children would actually dress up. She doesn't look like a very happy Halloweener, but she has a beautiful white lace dress on, and she holds a jack-o'-lantern and wears a witch's hat with stars, and the moon smiles dawn upon her. But do you notice in the chair there's a black cat? So it has the beginnings of what we would realize in the 20th century were the stereotypical images of Halloween. And these two young brothers actually dress as an Indian on the left-hand side and a clown on the right. Each holds a jack-o'-lantern, and we see that these costumes are probably something the mother simply ran up on the sewing machine. So it begins in this instance to show that not only costumes could be chosen, but it was also something that could be quite unique, such as this. This young trick-or-treater is dressed in a witch's hat and a swastika-printed costume as she carries a jack-o'-lantern, candy basket, and rides a corn broom. In Hinduism, the right-facing symbol is called a swastika, symbolizing Surya, meaning the sun, prosperity, and good luck. However, before it was corrupted by the Nazi power in Germany, there was in the early 20th century a huge fad for the swastika as a benign good luck symbol. The swastika remained a popular embroidery motif in Eastern Europe and Russia until its symbolism of luck was forevermore corrupted. But we also began to see in the 50s and 60s children holding aloft on sticks battery-operated jack-o'-lanterns, much more safe than a candle. But seeing here a group of young children, some brandishing battery-illuminated pumpkin lanterns on sticks, arrive at the steps of a house seeking Halloween treats. One has a pumpkin bucket for his candy, while the others have large brown bags, obviously meant to hold larger amounts of treats. But you also saw many wonderful aspects of what would actually be popular music and costumes of the time. And I hate to see it, but the thing is directly over. But this is actually a song which is by the Beatles. And this was something in a lot of ways that was performed in 1963. The record was All My Loving. And if you look at the child on the left, he's wearing what is a cardboard box, which is a record player. And on the front of his chest is a plastic disc that says All My Loving by the Beatles. You might recognize it says, close your eyes and I'll kiss you. Tomorrow I'll miss you. Remember, I'll always be true. And then while I'm away, I'll write home every day and I'll send all my loving to you. Well, this was an incredible costume. The ghost on the right-hand side seems fun, but it's so typical. But to go out as a record on a record player shows a little bit of ingenuity. But there was also a movie in the period of 1982 that was called E.T. And of course, seen here, a group of children dressed in E.T. costumes descended upon Halloween in 1982. E.T. stands for The Extraterrestrial, which was a science fiction movie produced and directed by Steven Spielberg and written by Melissa Matheson. It tells the story of Elliot, a boy who befriends an extraterrestrial, which he dubbed E.T., who is stranded on Earth. And they're trying to get him home by the use of an umbrella, which is covered in aluminum foil, and a Martinson's tin can, which is an empty coffee can, so they can actually use all of this different equipment to send him home. But look at all the children dressed as E.T. Well, in this instance, many children went out even with their dogs. The dog and the little girl are both dressed as clowns. And I love her little bag. It says, treats or I'll bite. I don't know if she'll bite or the dog will bite, but I hope they had treats for both of them. But there were also women that would actually come to the door when children knocked for trick-or-treating. And why not offer them candy out of a sterling silver candy dish? It's something in some ways that was very polite in suburban America. But children in this instance would dress up, whether it was a disguised mother's clothing or father's clothing, or even these, which we'll see in a few minutes, ready-made costumes that were purchased in supermarkets, department stores, and even specialty shops. But this was one of my favorite photographs. These children have just pure glee on their face. The little boy has a poncho, and it's actually got clowns embroidered on it, and he wears a star-bedecked cowboy hat. The little girl is a princess, but she has a regular shopping bag from a grocery store on which a skull face was placed. The happiness of children from the time they could walk until early teens on trick-or-treating Halloween night was something that was really quite special. But often, many children had the same outfit. Well, this I called Holy Batmania. This group of Bat boys and Bat girls are dressed and ready to protect Gotham in relation to the 1989 movie, which starred Michael Keaton and played in the theaters continuously for almost 6 months. Batman was a beloved comic book character, and he and his sidekick Robin were well-known television characters in the immensely popular show. The catchphrases were Batman has no limits, and Robin's who said holy whatever with his exclamations. We realized that you could even be Colonel Sanders. Colonel Harlan Sanders started a nationwide fast food restaurant known as Kentucky Fried Chicken. And though an attorney, his great claim to fame was a secret recipe of frying chicken that he first served in South Salt Lake, Utah. And within a few years, the company was franchised with more than 600 locations across the United States. And in 1964, Sanders sold the Kentucky Fried Chicken, but even after its sale, it was referred to as the Colonel's Chicken. And I love that their little candy baskets are actually a bucket of Colonel Sanders chicken. And you might even want to be this young child. This baby is dressed as Ruth Bader Ginsburg for Halloween. Wearing the trademark eyeglasses and lace J-bow collar and holding a wood gavel, the child has a Baby Ruth candy bar in front of her on the high chair table. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was an attorney and jurist who served as Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States from 1993 until her death in September of 2020. After a lifetime of flourishing in the face of adversity, she became an icon for empowered women who perceived her success as well-deserved and something all should try to emulate. Well, in a lot of ways, even this, which was a young boy named Aaliyah Elaine and Kadeem Dixon, wear Lion King Simba Halloween costumes at the Franklin Park Zoo Howell in 1998. The Lion King is a movie by Walt Disney that premiered in 1994 and soon was adapted as a critically acclaimed Broadway musical and later as a book, all showing how the lion takes his place in the circle of life. And the popularity of this character was immense, and the beloved Simba became a popular icon. Well, costumes were fun, but in the early part of the 20th century, it was the fact that many children did make do with whatever they had. By the period of the 1920s, there was a company in England by the name of Weldon, and Weldon would actually do patents for fancy dress for children. Now, it says it's 200 designs for carnival, gala, and pageant, but they were also used for Halloween. On the cover, you see a boy on the left who's the pearly king of London. In the center is a shepherdess, a young girl with a kimono from Japan, and a gypsy on the far right. And these were things that mothers or even seamstresses could simply run up on the sewing machine with extra fabric. And many children could now go trick-or-treating in a unique and wonderful costume. But during that period, there were companies such as the Gibson Art Company that later became known as Gibson Cards from Cincinnati, Ohio, that published a booklet that allowed children and adults to actually make decorations and party goods for a party for Halloween. Seen with a black cat on the cover and Halloween directly above, they were wonderful stories. But if you followed some of the directions, you could make a black cat mask. And by cutting this from cardboard and fixing it with twine or yarn, you could actually put a cat face. But they had jack-o'-lanterns, as you see on the upper left-hand side, made from an orange balloon. They also had on the lower part, you could simply place a paper hat, or on the right, with a corn broom, you could make a clown's face. In that instance, these were fun things to do, and children loved it. But it was also the fact that children were going trick-or-treating at night. Not every neighborhood was probably lit for the dark as well as it should be. many children just simply scattered, and they went in every which direction. During the period of about 1918, this company, Schrafft Patent Company, created a new cricket. They were also selling crickets previous to this time for World War I soldiers. And a cricket is something that you simply turn and makes a noise. These Halloween crickets that actually had an owl on the moon, or a black cat, a witch, even an owl, are things that not only made a sound, but they at least had the aspect that the children knew when they were approaching a house, they would play the cricket. And it was also something that you knew they were actually safe. These were fun, but so too wasn't going to the stores to actually see what was available. Not everybody wanted to dress in homemade costumes, and seen here in the 1950s, they're not only jack-o'-lanterns in the foreground, vinyl masks, but also the beginnings of skeleton costumes. And in this instance, many people began to realize, as it went on from the 1940s and the 1950s, costumes were getting to be available, ready-made, and very inexpensive. This is a store in Boston that actually was on Winter Street. You see on the left-hand side individual costumes that probably go the gamut of princesses and gypsies, skeletons, and everything imaginable. But you see in the interesting blackboard, who will you be on Halloween? Well, this was a major feature, and one of the biggest of the companies was Jack's Joke Shop. It was on Tremont Street, directly opposite Boston Common. Founded in 1921, it wasn't just a joke shop, but they offered everything from costumes, especially for Halloween. They had vinyl masks, but these were masks that actually fit over the head, so even the back was covered. And you might see along the two shelves, you might be Cleopatra or Marilyn Monroe or Donald Duck, Yogi Bear. They were all great politicians as well as even cartoon characters. But really what caught my attention were the feet. Seen on the right-hand side, these were about size 15. So you can imagine a child coming with maybe a sheet over their body with these enormous feet. It must have made quite the impression. But Jack's Joke Shop was a major place that children would find all sorts of wonderful things. But during the 1950s and 60s, W.T. Grant and Woolworths began to offer very inexpensive but ready-made costumes. The surprising thing, unlike the vinyl masks, which must have been terribly warm and causing perspiration for the child, these were masks that just fit over the face and were made of light plastic. The costumes were also flame retardant, and though many children used battery-operated jack-o'-lanterns, some children still saw lit candles in jack-o'-lanterns as they approached houses. And seen here for $1.98, you could be a skeleton, Donald Duck, or even a witch. But they offered all of these Halloween masks at only 99 cents. So you could simply dress with a mask and descend upon the village to actually get your candy. Sears Roebuck, which even at the turn of the 20th century had a wish book, which actually provided everything under the sun, would also offer Halloween outfits. And you see on the upper portion, it's divided between boys and girls. It's a little bit sexist, but a boy could be a member of the Marines or the Navy or even the United States Army, an Indian, an astronaut, or a policeman. Then a girl could be a Red Cross nurse. She could be a ballerina or a majorette or a princess. But you notice on the upper right-hand side, it still had those popular figures, Superman, Batman, and even Mickey Mouse. And these, again, you can see they're increasing in value from $1.98 to $4.30, were again a wide variety. And even by the early 1980s, these were actually produced in such a way that you could actually become Bugs Bunny or Hot Wheels, or you actually see Pebbles or Bam Bam, Casper the Friendly Ghost, and even a witch and Popeye. These were fun and children loved it. And I equate this with lunch boxes of the same period that had the same type of character figures that would decorate them. But we realized in some ways some children wanted to be a popular character. And this is "Have Gun, Will Travel," which was the motto of Paladin. Beginning in 1958, this was a popular Western television series featuring Richard Boone and Cam Tong that was produced and originally broadcast on both television as well as radio. The television series version of the series was rated number 3 in the Nielsen ratings every year for the first 4 seasons. And it is one of the few shows in television history to spawn a successful radio version. So with this 5-piece outfit, including a vest, mask, tie ring, and belt slide, what young boy wouldn't be proud to be Paladin on Halloween? And of course, candy was a major feature. And of course, probably like us, we get 2 trick-or-treaters here in Osterville, and they live across the street. We look forward to them. But that bowl of candy remains there, staring us in the face. But in the 1940s and 50s, specific Halloween candy was being produced. And we'd see that Halloween seems to be a night when children roam the streets dressed in costumes and masks or homemade attire, and see candy from every house within walking distance. Candy companies such as Curtis, Brock's, Nestle, Schrafft's, Mars, Hershey, Luden's, Carlton's, and Necco, among others, offered everything under the sun, from, of course, the well-known Baby Ruth bar, Butterfinger, Mars bar, Fifth Avenue, Nestle's Crunch, and Nutlog candy bars, to Cracker Jack, Wrigley's chewing gum, Wowee chewing gum whistles, Pez candy, Indian corn, and even fresh fruit. Well, Carlton would actually offer individual Halloween marshmallow witches. And for 79 cents, there were 80 individually wrapped that would allow you to enjoy seeing the children take them. But they also had candy with Curtis, and it says Trick or Treats. This is 6 varieties, and you can see that they have not only 5-cent bars, but 2-cent bars. And it was the difference in the size. Baby Ruth, Butterfinger, and we realized that even marshmallow caramello bars, these were delicious, and children liked them. You also had Brock's candy, and Brock's, which made a variety of candy year-round, actually made specific things just for Halloween. And as the children approach the house, one says, "This is the house that has the Brock's. Somebody ring the doorbell." Well, you're not going to get any candy unless you ring it. And seen here, the hostess of the house offers Baby Ruth and Butterfinger bars to the witch and her brother, who's dressed as a bunny rabbit. It was major during that period of time, major development that Halloween candy would actually be a huge part of the production for the whole year. And many of these companies, such as Schrafft's, which you might remember was at Sullivan Square in Charlestown, not only made fine candy, but for Halloween, they made these trick-or-treat specialties. They made on the left-hand side a peppermint patty. They made a caramello bar, and on the right, a marshmallow bar. These were things that were not just delicious, but they were made by a major producer of candy in the United States. And in some ways, they even made these little sayings. You see a little black cat that says tricks or treats within their mouth. And of course, it says, "Here, kitty, kitty, kitty." But kitty means the child, but not the kitty on the bag. But Milky Ways was probably enjoyed by the children equally. If the cat could eat it, I'm sure she or he would as well. And there was also Mars bars. And you see here, Sweet Stockin'. It's this shock of corn with a clown directly behind it. And this is for Milky Way bars. All of these things are still available today. But the whole aspect was that during this period, this was becoming in some ways specially marketed just for Halloween. Not everything was candy. I'm sure you eat Cracker Jack. I do every so often just to remember how good it was when I was a child. And it says, "The trick that makes the perfect treat anytime." Well, the individual box had, of course, caramelized corn and peanuts, and there was a little prize inside. So it was a little bit different than the regular chocolate candies that were being offered. They also offered Pez candy, which had started in Germany in the 1870s with these individual dispensers that gave out small rectangular pieces of candy. But for Halloween, they would make them not only as witches' heads, owls, and bats, and of course it was something, as you see here, 2 Pez packs for 25 cents, but they would usually provide a dozen in a box, and they were really quite good. But there was also that one house that didn't provide either candy or Cracker Jacks, but offered you a box of cereal. And as you can see here, the post-treat pack, which was marketed just for Halloween, shows this child raising his mask to choose a post-alphabet cereal for the morning. In a lot of ways, all post cereals happen to be just a little bit better. I'm sure the mother and father must have loved it as well because there wasn't as much candy. But during that period, they also made all sorts of different games. And these games could be played by both adults as well as children. And this one is called the Halloween Fate Game. It had black bats, stars, and crescent moons decorating the 4 corners, and was a game of fate, of fortune, made by the Beasel Company. And by spinning the dial, it told you one of 16 fates that would befall you on Halloween, which such fates as your dog will eat your homework, a bat will steal your hat, eat an apple every day or your teeth will fall out, and if you wake up late tomorrow, eat a lemon. They were peculiar fates to predict, but it was a fun game nonetheless. There was also Witsy Wits, the fortune teller, and her box of stunts for parties. And it says here, this was something that had a smiling witch with an owl perched on her outstretched arm, and the other holding her broom as she stands behind a steaming cauldron. This box of stunts with fortune-telling and a game of forfeits was a board game produced by Alderman Fairchild Company in 1928 and includes fortune-telling, a game of forfeits, lucky cards, and party suggestions. And within it, you would have all of these individual things that you would actually have one of 16 different fates. So it was something that children and adults could play, and it was somewhat fun. But they also did the Hand of Fate. And this is a fortune-telling game, and this board game was manufactured by McLaughlin Brothers in 1901. The cover of the box has a young, bespectacled girl dressed in a witch costume with peaked red hat and cape, and reading to a black cat both inside a ring with symbols of the zodiac. Around the ring are black cats, bats, and owls, and the Hand of Fate was a popular parlor game that piqued Victorians' fascination with mysticism. And much like that, this was the luminous spirit. This was something that was produced by the American Novelty Company in the 1940s as, quote, get this, spirited fun for parties of young and old, unquote. The center of this game has a witch riding her broom, which acts as an arrow to point out one of the 12 fortunes. The odd charms, symbols, and creatures, including a ghost, bat, devil, and snake. And even this, adults having a Halloween party, might have been fun. They're not dressed up, but they do wear funny, fancy paper hats for Halloween, and the table is decorated with orange candles as well as a centerpiece of a jack-o'-lantern. What kind of food would you serve if you were to actually have a Halloween party? Well, my father was a vice president of Armour Meats for his first 25 years of his career. Armour made Weenie Witch Halloween Party skinless frankfurters. These were something that had open fire flavor. And as it said on this advertisement, your goblins will gobble them up. And that way, what better thing to serve Weenie Witches? But there was also the fact that the Baker Chocolate Company, the oldest manufacturer of chocolate in the United States, offered this, not only a chocolate cake, but also recipes for these little chocolate cupcakes covered in milk chocolate. It said that it's bewitching Halloween surprises, and it offered extra rich and luscious candies and cakes with Baker's chocolate. But one of the favorite that I always had was midnight cake. It says, have a spooky Halloween party and serve them this cake. It says it's bewitching. The black midnight cake, just the thing for your gay Halloween festivities. It was actually devil's food cake covered in white buttercream frosting. And it was something that not only is today quite a treat, but I would love this even for my birthday. In a lot of ways, Christmas was something that we saw Christmas cards being made by the early part of the 1850s and 60s, but Halloween cards really didn't come in until the first decade of the 20th century. It says Halloween greetings and has a young girl in a witch's cape and hat holding a black cat and a broom, and it says, "May Halloween frolics engage you tonight, and your futures by witches predicted be bright." These were done by the dozens, and many of them were simply postcards, not full cards. During that period, many of them had very interesting sayings. And this woman, dressed as a witch and holding a jack-o'-lantern, says, "The Halloween lantern. At 12 o'clock you must be ready, and hold your pumpkin good and steady. For by its rays of candlelight, on Halloween all things are bright." Not only do you see the little black cat with the mouth open, must be saying something, but I love the moon. And here, Halloween time. "Tonight upon your pillow, close your eyes and hide your head, for the fairies and the goblins will be hovering round your bed." Something you can imagine, probably after a couple of drinks. And seen here, a woman staring into a mirror, it says, "If at midnight with the pumpkin light you steal to your room unseen, in the mirror appears the face of your lover true on Halloween." I don't think it ever really happened. But you also see here two young children, "The Thrilling Halloween." And this is done by a woman named Ellen Clapsaddle. And she depicted two frightened children reading Ye Ghost Story. And 'tis certainly a thrilling Halloween. Clapsaddle was a well-known artist at the turn of the 20th century who is recognized as one of the most prolific postcard and greeting card artists of her era. And this card that she did actually depicts a jolly Halloween and had a boy dressed in a white-collared robe holding a large jack-o'-lantern. The boy's arm has a metal rivet that allows the arm and pumpkin to move to cover his face. Clapsaddle was acclaimed during her career for her prodigious work, and her artist's designs have become highly prized. She is credited with over 3,000 designs in the postcard field during her career. And of course, seen here, a cat, obviously black, is acting as a conductor as these jack-o'-lanterns sing a song. It says, "Sing a song of Halloween, pumpkins everywhere. Cats and bats and witches are flying through the air." These were fun, and children as well as adults would begin to send them. But Norman Rockwell, the man who really chronicled middle-class America in the 20th century, depicted this well-dressed couple in 1920 using a Ouija board to guess their future fate together. And will the spirits tell them of their future in a positive or negative response? Well, William Fuld produced boards under the name of Ouija, claiming he learned the name Ouija from using the board and that it was an ancient Egyptian word meaning good luck. Fuld popularized the more widely accepted etymology that the name came from a combination of the French and German word for yes. But in that instance, Ouija boards was something that were thought mystical and very dangerous. And we see this little cat. This was Raycraft cards that had been published in Boston since the early part of the 1920s. And the little black cat pops out of a jack-o'-lantern with a hat. And it says, "Black cats, witches' hats, jack-o'-lanterns, black, orange, green, white, and green. These are the colors of Halloween." Well, in some ways, even this, the stereotypical thing of a witch, jack-o'-lantern, black cats, and even an owl. Halloween greetings. Dame Fortune will have smiled on me, her cat's the blackest ever seen. Will have brought to me the best of luck, if I may see you on Halloween. These cards would actually go out to many people, but we realized it was big business. And Halloween might be an old-fashioned way of saying the night before All Saints' Day, but it has become much more than that. Halloween is still considered a powerful turning point in the wheel of the year, signifying the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The pumpkin is often linked to rebirth and fertility and symbolizes harvests and crops. So with a tip of the hat to the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain, we realize that Halloween has come full circle. Since this is the time for goblins and bats, Halloween spirits, ghosts and cats, weird happenings and witches brew, these are the things I wish for you. Well, this book was a joy to write. I not only learned so much, especially about Stingy Jack, a man that I had never heard of, but all of the various different stories that touch upon what is Halloween and its traditions in Boston. We probably share many of the same traditions, costumes, beliefs, candies, but the idea is in some ways this is something that's so appropriate as something that chronicles what we celebrated in the 20th century. Thank you very much.